All right, great. So welcome everybody who's joining us on the internet. This is the iPad Journals project at the Robertson School at VCU. We're doing a Google Hangout today, and we're really excited that Ryan Nobles is joining us, a CNN reporter and almost Richmond native. He's from New York, but he worked here in Richmond, and he became so familiar with all of us. So welcome, Ryan.
Hey, thank you for having me. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Great. And Ryan is joining us from Las Vegas. He's covering the Democratic presidential debate there today for CNN. Of course, Ryan was an anchor and reporter for NBC 12 here in Richmond for several years, and also an adjunct professor for our school that has talked to this class in previous semesters. So a great friend of our program, and even while he is now on the national stage, we're so happy that you can join us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's always fun to join anything having to do with VCU.
Great. Thanks so much. Maybe Ryan, we start out since you're in Las Vegas. You're in the middle of the action. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing. Did you get there yesterday? Maybe a couple of days ago. And what's your day like today as a reporter? How is that going?
Yeah, sure. So I flew in on Sunday. I actually got a relatively early flight in on Sunday, so I got to enjoy a little bit of Las Vegas for most of the day Sunday. Didn't have any work responsibilities on Sunday. But what my job is I work for CNN's affiliate services division called News Source. So basically, we have a group of around 10 stations, affiliates across the country in different cities, where essentially I am their correspondent covering the 2016 presidential campaign. And right now, that's my only responsibility. I've done a lot of other things for CNN, but for at least for the next year, my job will be to report on the campaign for these affiliates. So basically, 3 days a week, we do live reports for these affiliates. We produce content for them every single day. We do a lot of different social media stuff. We have a digital series that we work with them, and we're launching a podcast on Friday, which I'm really excited about. And so the other big thing that we do is we go to all the big events happening during the campaign, and we do live reports from there. So we were in California last month for the second Republican debate, and this is the first Democratic debate, and we're here in Las Vegas for that. So yesterday, what my job is that we put a story together last week where we got a one-on-one interview with Anderson Cooper, and so we profiled his job moderating the debate tomorrow night, and we basically got our logistical house in order. Las Vegas is a crazy place, as many of you probably know, so we had to find where our location was in relation to where the debate stage was and where we were going to be live from. We're actually right outside the spin room tonight. We'll be inside the spin room during the actual debate. And then we did live reports for the 10 stations that we have a contract with, but then other stations outside of those markets can also contract us. So we were on in Los Angeles last night. We were on in San Francisco too, I think. I'm just trying to remember all the different stations. So we basically we do that live report for each one of those stations with our story, and we also throw in questions, and we do a bit of a talk back live from Las Vegas. So today, kind of the same drill. It'll be a little bit different because today's debate day. We don't produce a story leading into the debate. We just kind of do Q&As with the different stations preparing it. But then I'm live throughout the debate. So CNN allows local stations to take about up to a minute of the debate while the debate is happening. And I'll actually do live reports for TV stations across the country while the debate is happening. So I've got to kind of watch the debate with one eye. We have a producing team in Washington, D.C., where I'm based, that will also be taking in the material. I have a field producer here in Las Vegas that'll help with that as well. But we kind of give a running play-by-play of the debate as it happens, and then we'll produce one final story that's kind of a recap of the debate tonight. And then tomorrow, we'll do kind of live reports from Vegas again with how people are reacting to what happened. So it's a pretty intense couple of days here where you're just going the whole time.
Okay, great. And when you were here in Richmond, you, of course, were one of the first journalists here to use social media to be on blogs. I saw when I looked at some of the things that you're doing at CNN, I saw that you started a podcast now. It's called the Running Mate, right? So how do you use social media and mobile technology like your phone, how much of a role does that play in your reporting on a day-to-day basis? And does that compete with the TV reporting that you're doing? Yeah, how do you manage both?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's been a difficult transition for me from where I was on. When I was on NBC 12, my job there was to report for NBC 12, to get the content, to push people back to NBC 12. And now I have this kind of weird hybrid responsibility where I do work for CNN, I report for CNN, so I'm on the national network pretty frequently. I'm going to be working for CNN on the domestic network later this month. But I also have this companion responsibility where I'm literally a reporter for the 900 affiliates, local affiliates across the country that CNN has a partnership with. So it's kind of difficult to kind of, send out messages on behalf of these other stations because there's so many stations that you're working with. So I've had to find ways in terms of kind of the actual business of reporting on social media. We've had to kind of trying to find creative ways to work around that because obviously everybody has access to my Twitter feed no matter where they are. So one of the things we try to do is the podcast is one thing which is going to kind of complement our television work where, for instance, we talked to Anderson Cooper last week about his preparations for the debate, but we also talked to him about the campaign in general and some of his work as a correspondent. And so we only were able to use about, 25 to 30 seconds of that in our TV report last night. We're going to be able to use the rest of it for the podcast, which launches Friday. So it'll complement our television work. And that's something that we tease when we're on with the local stations. The other thing that we started doing, which is also, I think, kind of a new and innovative way to tell stories, is we've started a digital only series, which is also called Running Mate. It's all underneath the kind of the Running Mate umbrella, the way we've branded it. And that's basically, I tell the whole story with only my phone and a selfie stick. And if I'm in a position where I see that there's a story to be told, I pull out the selfie stick. I've got it right here. I have it with me at all times, just in case. I pull out the selfie stick and we go to work. And so that's usually a little bit lighter, kind of behind the scenes storytelling. I did one from California where it was basically just walking around the debate stage at the Reagan Library, which was really interesting because the debate was actually in front of Air Force One, which is they have an Air Force One inside the Reagan Library. So it was kind of a massive production effort to put that together. And then I told another story, a digital story, where when the Pope was in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago, my wife was bound and determined to get our kids to see him. So I just took my phone with me and videotaped everything that we did on that day and put together a quick 1.5-minute piece that kind of gave you insight into the 3.5 hours of work that it took for the 15 seconds where the Pope went by us. So, it's just a way to complement our television reporting. But the other thing, which I think is really applicable to what you guys do with the iPad journals, is my phone is a reporting tool at all times. So a couple of really interesting things that have happened to me while I've been working at CNN was I covered the Oklahoma City bombing 10th anniversary, and Bill Clinton was the keynote speaker because he was in office at the time of the bombing. And his wife, Hillary Clinton, who's going to be here tonight, had just announced that she was running for president, probably 2 or 3 days before that had happened. And nobody had talked to Bill Clinton about his feelings about his wife running for president. And I was standing along kind of a barrier on the outside of the memorial. And Bill Clinton came out that way. And there was a big crowd of people that were hoping to get a glimpse of him or maybe shake his hand. And I saw him wander over toward where we were standing, and I got my phone out. Didn't have a camera there. And I actually think that if we'd had a professional camera there, he might have been a little reluctant to come over. I mean, his goal here was just to kind of talk to people. And I whipped the phone out and I just asked him, what do you think about your wife running for president? And all he said was, I'm proud of her. But it became the first comments that he had made about Hillary Clinton running for president. So I sent it to our desk in Washington, and it all of a sudden became this big breaking news alert. Now, we could have a conversation about whether or not it deserved that status. But I had texted my wife to say, oh, I just interviewed Bill Clinton, kind of in a jokey way. And then she was watching CNN, and a banner came along the bottom of the screen that said, breaking news, Bill Clinton talks for the first time about Hillary Clinton. And she was like, did you really just interview Bill Clinton? And I'm like, yeah, I did. I guess that they were going blazing with that. So they ended up doing a whole big web story with that and did some stuff with it on TV. And then just the other day, I was at the Conservative Values Voter Summit in Washington, D.C., working on a different story just about its impact on the presidential race. And it was a day that John Boehner had decided that he was going to step down as the Speaker of the House. And Ted Cruz had just finished hammering him on the stage. And I happened to be standing right outside of the ballroom when he finished. And he came out of the room, and I happened to be standing in the right place at the right time. He actually walked right over and stood next to me while this crowd of reporters got around him. And he said, okay, I'll take a few questions from the press. CNN didn't have a camera there, but I had my phone. I put my phone out, and it was right in the right spot. And he ended up, making some accusations about Boehner cutting a deal to leave the speakership. That ended up being used on CNN quite a bit. So, wherever you are at whatever time, the phone is always at the ready, and you just never know when a story is going to pop up.
I'm sure students love to hear that a CNN reporter is walking around with a selfie stick. Great detail there. If you're watching us, you're not in our classroom and you're watching us online, you can ask Ryan questions. Just use the hashtag iPad Journals, and then I'll bring your questions into the conversation. So Ryan, you just said you talked about how important your phone is in the reporting that you do when a camera isn't there. Are you so which platforms are you going to from your phone? Is that mostly Twitter? Have you experimented with Periscope? Is that something that is being discussed at CNN as having potential? Or
yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, I use Twitter a lot, but CNN has taken a very cautious approach with Periscope. Initially, we, when it first launched, nobody really knew what it was, and I was using it quite a bit. I covered the shooting at the AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and actually was able to Periscope quite a few pretty interesting things. There was a kind of a spontaneous chorus that broke out and sang that I was able to broadcast on Periscope. I covered the riots in Baltimore, and I had a lot of people giving me feedback on Twitter about, just how bad is it? We obviously on television you show the worst things because that's where the news is. But people wanted kind of a greater perspective of what the community looked like. So my producer and I just got in a car and I periscoped all around the neighborhood in West Baltimore, and that ended up having over 1,000 live viewers. And people were, it was interesting because people can ask questions and you can respond to them while you're doing the live broadcast. But CNN has kind of reined that in a little bit. They're concerned about kind of the blowtorch that could erupt as a result of having the ability to just go live at any point. So we're still kind of working through that policy right now. So we've kind of shied away from Periscope and any kind of live streaming at the moment. But I think that all of those platforms have huge potential. And it's the big thing that I've told this class before, and I used to tell my students at VCU is, each one of these different platforms has different audiences, and you've got to kind of present the content in a way that you think that audience will consume. There's really not an appetite for breaking news on Facebook. I mean, people look at it, they see it. The place people want breaking news is on Twitter. So you tend to push that more on Twitter. But pictures of my kids doing silly things, Facebook eats that up. So, when I'm trying to interact with our viewers on a personal level, a picture or a video of my kid playing t-ball is going to do a lot better on that platform. So, you just kind of try and present yourself in all different respects so that you can build that connection with the audience when they're looking to you for, that type of information.
Great. Let's open it up for some questions. Who has a question for Ryan? I saw Sean. Sean, you were posting something on Twitter.
I guess my question just was, how do you recommend, I suppose, folks like us get involved covering big events like you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I always told my students at VCU, and I'll tell the same thing to you guys is, and I actually have a very good friend of mine who I went to college with, 18 years ago, who I hadn't seen in a long time, that actually works out here in Vegas and is kind of a multimedia journalist and worked in television for a long time. And he and I were kind of talking about how the business has changed so much. And I, make the argument every single time that it's an exciting time. And, you know, you guys sitting in these seats right now, I strongly believe are going to be the ones that kind of determine how we consume information in the future of journalism, because, you know, the technology is changing so quickly. And the advice that I would have given my students 2 years ago has changed even compared to what I would say right now. So I think you guys are at the forefront because, like I talked about, you know, here I am, I'm a national correspondent for a global news network, and I am reporting with a selfie stick and a phone, which is exactly the same kind of reporting that you can do. You have that ability. I mean, the first digital piece that I produced for CNN, I did 100% on my phone. I shot it on my phone. I edited it with iMovie on my phone, and we sent it out via the phone. You know, I now use Adobe Premiere to edit it just because it's a little easier, but theoretically I could do it. But that's all, you know, software and material that you guys have access to, that when I started in the business, you know, you had to be working for a professional network in order to have access to just the technology. So my advice is always, you're a reporter all the time. You know, I talked to one of my good friends who's a PR representative at Dominion, and he talked about how Dominion's PR approach has changed so much that, you know, 15 years ago, they kind of assessed that they had around 500 to 800 media outlets that they needed to keep in contact with at all times. They now view it that they have 5 million, because they literally view every single person with a mobile device as someone who is theoretically a journalist or a media outlet. So you can be that. If you want to report now, you have the platforms to do that. And in terms of reporting on big events, it's not hard. You know, all of these entities want coverage. So, like, I know Donald Trump is going to be in Richmond tomorrow. And I've already had a couple people who are not necessarily affiliated with local news entities that say, how do we get access to that event? And I'm like, just go. You know, you can tell that story at that event because the access is going to be incredible, and because he's going to want people to be there. And if you're there and you've got a phone, you can tell that story in a really unique and creative way. And, you know, there's going to be a lot of people telling that story, but perhaps you're going to be the person that catches the one interesting thing that nobody else catches. So, yeah, I mean, my best advice to you is you just got to go do it. And the environment that we work in now, you know, if you catch a story that nobody else catches, that can allow you to get the attention of someone that makes a big decision and perhaps wants to hire you to do something like that full time. And the other thing I would advise is just find different and creative ways to tell stories and make them accessible on the mobile platform, because that's really where the future is.
Great connection, Sean. The student who just asked you is actually assigned with another student to cover Donald Trump tomorrow night.
All right, you guys will have fun. I covered Donald Trump at he did a rally very similar to the one that he's going to do in Richmond on Wednesday in Mobile, Alabama. And I can tell you, you know, there were people there lined up about 5 hours before the event took place. And by the time they opened the doors, the line to get in was about 2 miles long. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of crowd he gets in Richmond tomorrow. I don't think the Richmond audience is necessarily exactly the same as it would be in Mobile, Alabama, but I bet there'll be some similarities.
Nice. Anybody else? Yes. Neil.
How did you first get started in journalism, and what attracted you to political reporting?
Yeah, this is a true story. What I consider to be my first job in journalism was I did the morning announcements at my high school. And, you know, I was always really interested in being a television news reporter from a young age. I think it probably generated in the fact that I loved TV, and the only television my parents would let me watch outside of a very small window of cartoons on Saturday morning was the news. So even as like a 10-year-old kid, I would consume the news in mass quantities because my dad would watch it, and it was the only time I was allowed to watch TV. So that's when I first got a fascination with television news, and I wanted to learn more how to do it. And so I looked for every opportunity to kind of essentially be a reporter. And one of the places that allowed me to do that was the morning announcements every day at my school. So I would come, I didn't have a homeroom. I would go down and do the morning announcements. But from there, I just looked for every opportunity that I could to tell stories. I did a local radio show for my high school. Then when I went to college, I worked at the college radio station, and I interned at local TV stations, and basically just spent, you know, the good portion of my young adult life finding opportunities to report. And then once I got interning at a local station, I kind of learned how you get those opportunities to get your tape out and make connections with local stations. And from there, I worked at a station in Rochester. Then I was in Utica, a really small market, for 4 years. Was in Albany, New York. Actually left television for a little while, and then ended up in Richmond. So it's just a matter of putting yourself out there and reporting. I mean, and looking for every opportunity to do that.
Okay. Yeah, Danny.
What are some tips to build a larger audience on social media?
Yeah, I will tell you that I think it's a lot tougher to build social media followers than it was like when Marcus and I first started doing this. I think I joined Twitter in 2008, right before President Obama was first elected. And at that time, there was a relatively small number of people that were using Twitter and Facebook as a reporting tool. And there was kind of a thirst for it. So because people wanted it, they didn't really care what you were reporting on. They just wanted that content in their feed. So they followed you. Well, now people are a lot more discerning because there are so many. I mean, basically everyone has some sort of social media presence. So as a result, you've got to find a way to present yourself in a unique way. And I think finding niches is really important. If you can be the guy that knows a lot about the underground music scene in Richmond, for instance, there's probably not very many people that are talking about that. I built my following largely on the fact that I was on TV every night, and that I was one of the few people that was really earnestly covering Virginia politics. And during the time where there were 2 swing state elections and 2 really competitive governor's races, that became a resource that people were looking for. But, now I've kind of found, I think that because there's so many people flooding these social media streams, I've really dialed back the amount that I contribute. I try now to only contribute stuff that's really good. I used to just throw everything up there. And now I think because people get annoyed with social media, they get annoyed with people that post too much. So I try and be a little bit more discerning with it. But the big thing is, and I think this is applicable to no matter what form of journalism that you decide to go down, it's all about good content. People are going to follow people that provide them interesting things that they want to read. It's no different than it was when you bought the newspaper 30 years ago. And I think a really good example of that is, and I'm not necessarily saying you should mimic this, but that guy George Takei that used to be on Star Trek, he's just found a niche on social media where he puts out these kind of funny posts that are also thought-provoking. He also kind of advocates for certain causes, but he does it in a way that people are interested in. They share those posts because they're interesting and fun, and he's built this enormous social media following as a result. And it's not necessarily the way he does it that you should mimic, but it's that thought process of, I'm only going to post something that I think people want to see and are going to be interested in. And the nice thing about social media that's different from, television or even the traditional newspaper is that you get instant feedback. We used to have to wait once every 4 months to find out if people were watching television news at the level that we hoped they were. Immediately whether or not someone responds to a Facebook post. So that allows you to kind of adapt as you go along.
Do you have more questions? No. Well, Ryan, let me ask you then. I saw a couple of weeks ago. I saw that I think you were staffing the Dallas office. So it seems like you're traveling quite a bit. So how does a typical month for you look like? I think, is it from now on that you're just focused on politics because that's going to be what you will be covering the next year, or could there be tomorrow a call and I don't know, you got to go to Seattle to cover a story? How flexible do you have to be in your work schedule?
Yeah. Now that I'm on the campaign, I'm out of the breaking news wheel. So the campaign is the only thing I do right now, unless some sort of catastrophic event of 9/11's level happened, then it would be an all hands on deck situation. But yeah, prior to basically the beginning of September, I was basically an on-call reporter 24 hours a day. And, I just give you an example of, you talked about Dallas. That started for me. I was working for News Source. I started at the end of June I went and covered a tropical storm in Dallas. That was for News Source. I was only supposed to be there for a couple of days. I left. We did 1 day of live shots, and we were supposed to fly back to Washington the next day. That night, the shooting in Charleston happened. We were on a flight the first thing the next morning and flew directly to Charleston. Well, actually, we connected in Washington, which was a cruel irony. Then ended up in Charleston. We were in Charleston for 3 days. I flew back to Washington, D.C. for a day, reported out of the Bureau on something else for that day. Then I flew back to Charleston for the funerals. Now, I was scheduled to go cover the Dallas Bureau for our for the national network on Monday. The Southeast Bureau chief sent me an email, and she said, make sure you pack. Basically, I had to pack for a month, because if something happened while I was in Charleston, they were going to send me directly to wherever that story might be. So then I flew to Dallas. I was in Dallas for a week and a half. During that time, I went to Granbury, Texas, which is about 2 hours from Dallas. I flew to Chicago for a day to cover a story and came back. Then I went on a week's vacation with my family in upstate New York. As soon as I got back, I did a run for domestic where I was sent to Lafayette, Louisiana for, I was there for 5 days for the theater shooting that happened there. And so, yeah, basically the summer was one thing after another. I got back from that, and then I did another thing for News Source, and then I was sent to Alabama to cover Donald Trump. That was also for the national network. Then I came back, and then basically it wasn't until, the middle to end of August where things calmed down, and then I got on the politics beat. So now I still do quite a bit of travel, but my travel is a lot more predictable. I know when it's going to happen, and the content. I kind of know how to. The hard part about when you're traveling on breaking news is, you've got to literally pack every kind of article of clothing you could ever imagine, because you could be. I covered 3 blizzards over the winter in Boston, Buffalo, and in DC. So you never know what could crop up. So, and I try and keep everything in one carry-on bag, because, you're connecting flights, and it just takes so much longer when you're checking stuff. So it's a matter of packing everything into this one carry-on bag. So you have like 1 pair of jeans, a pair of boots, 1 pair of sneakers, and 2 shirts essentially that you rotate in and out. It can be difficult, but it's also exciting. I was telling my friend this, who works in Vegas now. It's a weird thing. I had never done this kind of crazy travel, and it kind of your body chemistry changes. You have this different kind of adrenaline pumping through you, where you get on the road and you work really hard for a long period of time, and you can't wait to get home. And then you get home and everything slows down so dramatically, even for me with 3 little kids, that you kind of sit there at home and you start to get a little antsy, wondering when the next breaking news thing is going to happen. So, it was a pretty big difference from the day-to-day work in Richmond. It wasn't too much plane travel when I was working in Richmond.
Can you talk a little bit about, do you already know how you're going to cover the presidential race? Will you be, do you expect to be signed to a certain candidate and then be constantly traveling with that candidate? Are you going to be that reporter, or are you going to be more watching and then fly to when something is happening? So are you going to be more like embedded with the candidate, or
right.
Are you like
Since we're covering the entire campaign for our local station, so we're kind of covering it from a 30,000-foot view. We're covering every candidate. We're covering all the different dynamics in the race. So as a result, we won't be embedded with one candidate at any certain time. And we travel to the really big events. So we'll be at all the debates. We're going to go to Iowa for caucus night. We'll be in New Hampshire for primary night. We'll probably go to South Carolina. We're probably not going to we're not going to fly to cover an event for just one specific candidate, because we need to kind of have that global perspective. As the field narrows down, and maybe we're down to 2 candidates, and then when we get into Labor Day of next year, then there might be some discussion about traveling to cover specific events for specific candidates. But for the most part, aside from covering those big events, we cover it from DC, and we're live from DC 3 days a week. But obviously I have colleagues. I actually had an interesting conversation with Dan Merica, who's a great follow on Twitter. he's embedded for CNN with Hillary Clinton's campaign. And so he goes wherever she goes. And yesterday, her plane landed here in Las Vegas, and he actually had to like climb down into a ditch to take a picture of the plane as it landed. And then he was the first to report that Bill Clinton actually traveled with Hillary Clinton to this debate, which was a surprise. So we do have a crew of reporters. Another reporter that's a really good follow is Betsy Klein, who is our Iowa embed. So she's in Iowa, and she just goes to wherever a candidate is in Iowa. And she's a one-man band multimedia journalist. So she videotapes everything. She asks questions. She files reports for the web. She hands stuff up to correspondents. She'll appear on camera if they find that necessary. But I think right now we have Noah Gray, who's also a really good follow. He's following Trump everywhere he goes. So we have an embed with Trump. We have an embed in Iowa, an embed in New Hampshire, an embed with Hillary. I don't think we're embedded with Bernie Sanders yet. We might be. And I believe we're also embedded with Jeb Bush right now. So we obviously can't be embedded with every Republican candidate because there are so many of them, and a lot of them are serious candidates. So yeah, those, I mean, those are generally young journalists that have those jobs to start out with. That's a really good way to break into the network. If you ever, if you look 4 years down the road at those embed jobs, they're tough. They're like around the clock and a lot of hard work, but a really incredible experience, and they get to see and do a lot of fun stuff.
Right. And we got a question on Twitter from Vivian. Can you share how do you prepare to cover the spin room for tonight's Democratic debate? I actually worked in the spin room one time myself as a correspondent. It's over 10 years ago at a presidential debate. So it's really crowded, lots of people that want to get the message out. How do you prepare for that, and how do you how do you get them beyond their talking points in the spin room?
Yeah, I think the spin room's role in the campaign has changed a lot than probably when you did it 10 years ago, because there's such instant reaction to how the candidates performed with the various forms of social media and with the cable news outlets. So it used to be that the debate would happen, people would kind of digest it on their own. Then the spin room would be this place where the newspaper and TV reporters were kind of, given the perspective of the candidates. And then it wasn't until the following morning when the postmortem was really written about the campaign. And that's when everybody was like, okay, well, this is what people are saying about it. So now in the spin room, the spin is happening throughout the entire debate. Hillary Clinton's team will probably be tweeting from her account tonight, I should say, about what's happening during the debate. So the spin room now, in a lot of respects, I almost think it's part of the theater of the debate. Actually, tomorrow night, we've been in the spin room for the last day or two setting up, and Facebook's actually going to, because this debate is co-sponsored by Facebook, and it's going to be streamed on Facebook, and they're going to have questions on Facebook, and Facebook's actually has a room set up, kind of a corner of the spin room that's going to be set up, that's got like monitors and all these different things where they're going to be getting reaction so there's going to be people literally spinning in the spin room via Facebook. So it's changed a lot. I really believe that there's not a lot of substance that comes out of the spin room anymore. It's really become just part of the theater of the debate. At the debate in California, Clay Aiken was in the spin room reporting for Entertainment Tonight. So, it's exciting. It's fun. You see a lot of big name people come through there. But in terms of tangible journalism that comes out of the spin room, I don't think it really occurs that much anymore.
Okay, great. So we're almost at the end of class time, but we have time for one more question. And Ashley,
I was wondering, how do you balance your work life and your family life? It seems like you're very busy, and I've been ignoring my family. I'm not even half as busy.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And, I think that I was able to take this job at a good time in my life. I'm almost 40. I'm not 40 yet. I'm 39. So I kind of have a pretty good understanding of what's important in my life. I have a truly, understanding, remarkable champion of a wife. She wanted to stay home with our 3 kids, which makes the situation a lot easier for me in terms of my travel schedule. We don't have to juggle her work schedule with my work schedule. But I've kind of, I've made a commitment, this is a commitment I made myself, that when I'm home, my focus is my 3 kids and my wife. I don't spend a lot of time with my buddies, watching sports on TV or at a bar, or, I don't play rec league softball or anything like that. You know, I basically have my work life and my life at home, and my 3 kids and my wife take up all that time. And I just try and maximize every second that I get with my family, so that when I'm on the road, you know, that kind of fills a little bit of the void. You know, it's not easy. My kids are young enough now that they really don't, they just think this is kind of the way the world works. So it hasn't really hit them yet. But I will tell you, when I left for the last debate, it was actually the week of my birthday, and my kids just love birthdays, no matter whose birthday it is. And my son did not realize that I was going to be in California for my birthday. And so as I was getting ready to leave, that kind of hit him in a weird way, and he just started bawling. And it was like, that was the first time that I kind of had to take a step back and say, you know, I've got to make sure that I'm really spending quality time with my kids when I'm home. You know, you just have to, you know, there are times where you do have to tell your bosses, I just can't do this. You know, when I was I covered the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and I had covered the shooting in Roanoke the day before. You know, I went to Roanoke the day after that shooting. I was there that night, and then flew directly to New Orleans from there. So I was gone for about 6 days, and that hurricane that turned out not to be a hurricane was starting to churn up in the Atlantic. And my bosses were like, you know, would it be possible for you guys to go cover that hurricane? And I said, no, I've got to get home. And, you know, I have a really understanding boss who appreciates, you know, that I have a family and that's part of my responsibility. So yeah, it's just a matter of understanding and focusing on what you have to do. And sometimes it means, for me, even though I've been traveling and had really long days for a couple of days on the road, when I get home and my kids want to go check out the museums in Washington, D.C., even though I'm tired, we go, because I know that I need to do that. And so far, it's, you know, we've been able to strike that balance. My wife's been pretty understanding, and we figured it out. But, you know, it actually is a good way to wrap this up. And it's the one thing I used to tell all my students: television and broadcasting and journalism is an incredibly rewarding career, but you have to love the work. You have to really enjoy covering stories, writing stories, shooting stories, editing stories. You have to love every aspect of it, because the demanding aspects of it, working nights, weekends, holidays, missing family reunions, your parents not understanding why you can't just come for a barbecue on a Saturday. And if you don't love the work, if you hate the work, then it's not the career field for you. And I've never recommended anybody not doing it, but I really strongly believe you have to go into it with your eyes wide open. And if you love the work, you can find that balance. But if the work is a drag on you, the other stuff, the things that you don't have to worry about in a 9-to-5 accounting job, those will start to wear on you pretty quickly. So you really need to make an accounting of that before you dive head first, because it's a distinct reality, and something that you have to really cope with over the time that you work in journalism.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan. Those are some good words of wisdom for our future reporters. We thank you so much for spending the time with Ryan and Hank. And thank you so much for hanging out with us this morning. And then all the best to you, and great coverage tonight from the debate.
All right, guys, I appreciate it. Thank you. Follow me on Twitter.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
All right, thank you, guys. Have a good day.